The room was full of whispers. Shadows moved across the walls as men and women gathered, their faces hidden behind masks of greed. In the center of the stage, a child stood trembling. She did not know why so many eyes were staring at her. She only knew that her freedom ended the moment the hammer would fall. The girl's name was Lyra, though nobody here cared for names. To them, she was not a person, she was an object. Her small hands were tied. Her eyes were wide with fear. She tried to look for kindness in the crowd, but all she saw was hunger. Not hunger for food, but for power, for control, for the cruel ownership of a young soul. The auctioneer's voice was loud and cold. He called her beauty, innocence, and rare treasure. He spoke as if she was a piece of gold, not a breathing child. Every word cut her heart deeper, because with every cheer from the crowd she understood more. They were not here to save her. They were here to buy her. "Look at those eyes," the auctioneer shouted, lifting her chin, roughly. "She will serve well, loyal and quiet. She has no family, no protector. She belongs to the highest bidder." The crowd laughed, and some men raised their hands, their rings shining under the dim light. Lyra's breath quickened. She wanted to scream, but fear locked her voice. Her small body shook as the bidding began. 200, a man in the front said. 300, another shouted, his eyes never leaving her trembling figure. The numbers rose higher and higher. Every call was like a nail sealing her fate. She looked down at the floor, wishing she could vanish into the cracks, but she could not. Her mind raced back to the past. She remembered the village where she once laughed. She remembered her mother's warm voice, her father's gentle hand. But those days were stolen in a single night. Strangers came, fire burned, screams filled the air. And when morning came, she was in chains. Now she stood in front of strangers. Again, not as a daughter, not as a child, but as a product. The air was heavy with smoke and greed. The crowd pressed forward, their voices rising. The auctioneer's gavel struck the block, louder and louder. Lyra closed her eyes, wishing it would all end. 500. A deep voice thundered. The room fell silent for a moment. All heads turned to the man in the corner. He wore a dark cloak, his face hidden. His presence was heavy, like a shadow stretching across the room. Whispers spread quickly. Some stepped. Back in fear, this man was not just any buyer. He was powerful, dangerous, and he had chosen her. The auctioneer's smile grew wider. 500. Do I hear more? He shouted. No one dared to answer. The gavel came down with a final strike. Sold! He cried. The crowd clapped, but their cheer was hollow, for in that moment, a child's fate was sealed. Hands grabbed Lyra roughly and pulled her off the stage. The rope around her wrists cut into her skin. She stumbled, her knees weak, but no one cared. To them she was bought and paid for. She belonged to another. Her tears fell quietly, disappearing into the dust. Nobody saw them. Or maybe they simply refused to see. The man in the cloak walked forward slowly. His boots echoed on the wooden floor. He said nothing, but his silence was more frightening than any voice. He signed the papers, gave the money, and took her hand. Cold, strong fingers closed around her fragile wrist. For Lyra, it was the touch of chains made of flesh. As he led her out of the auction hall, she dared to look back one last time. She saw the crowd laughing, already waiting for the next victim. She saw the auctioneer counting money with a smile. And she saw the stage where she had stood empty now. Her heart felt heavy, for she knew she was not the first child sold here, and she would not be the last. The night air hit her face as they stepped outside, but the stars above gave her no comfort. They looked too far away, too cold. The man's grip never loosened, pulling her into the darkness. Her legs moved, but her spirit wanted to stop. She whispered her mother's name, but the wind swallowed it. No one came. No one heard. The world moved on, as if nothing had happened. But for Lyra, the world she once knew was gone. She was no longer free, no longer a child. She was a possession, a purchase. Her innocence was sold for coins, and her story was only beginning. Somewhere in the shadows of that cruel night, a seed of resistance grew quietly in her heart. She did not know when, and she did not know how, but a voice inside her whispered one promise: This suffering will not last forever. The walls were tall and gray. They were not made of stone, but they felt harder than any rock. To Lyra, they were prisons even without iron bars. The house where she was kept was rich with silk curtains and golden lamps, but for her it was only another kind of cage. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Every sunrise felt the same. She woke when she was told. She ate when she was ordered. Her life belonged to others. Her body was not her own. She lived in silence because silence was the only thing that kept her alive. The man in the cloak, her new master, was not loud. He did not shout, he did not beat her often, but his silence was heavier than a scream. His eyes were cold, his words were sharp. One glance from him was enough to break her spirit. He did not. I need chains of iron. His chains were fear. At night, she lay on the floor of a locked room. Her hands trembled as she hugged herself. The voices of the house filled the air. Laughter from guests, music from parties, glasses of wine clinking. But none of that reached her heart. Her world was darkness. Her companion was silence. Sometimes she wondered if anyone even remembered she existed. She was hidden when guests came. She was never allowed to speak unless spoken to. To the world outside she was invisible, but inside her suffering was louder than thunder. Years passed slowly, like water dripping from a broken jar. Her body grew, but her soul remained trapped. The child became a young woman, but the young woman felt like a ghost. She moved where she was told, she smiled when forced. Her spirit sank deeper into the shadows, yet in the stillness of her heart, something small remained, a spark that refused to die. When she looked out the window at the moon, she whispered softly, "Someday." Just one word, but it carried all her hope. She did not know what day it would be, but she believed it would come. The other servants in the house avoided her. Some pitied her, some feared her. They whispered behind doors, calling her the companion. To them, she was both cursed and owned. Nobody dared to speak with her openly. They all lived in the same prison, but her chains were heavier. One night, as rain hit the roof like falling stones, she heard voices outside her room. Strangers had come to the house. Men with cloaks and low voices. They spoke about trade, money, and secrets. But one sentence froze her blood. Another auction soon. More children, young and pretty, easy to break. Lyra pressed her hand to her mouth to stop herself from crying out. Her heart pounded in her chest. She was not alone. Others were suffering like her. Others were about to be stolen, sold, broken. The silence around her became unbearable. It was no longer just her pain. It was theirs too. That night, she did not sleep. She lay awake, listening to every sound. Her mind painted pictures of children in chains standing on a stage, just like she once had. Her soul screamed inside her chest, but her lips stayed shut because silence was survival. Days after, she noticed something strange. A new servant had joined the house. He was young, with quiet eyes. Unlike the others, he did not avoid her. When their eyes met, he did not look away. For the first time in years, someone looked at her like she was human. He carried trays, cleaned halls, and bowed his head. But sometimes, when no one was watching, he glanced at her. And in his glance, there was no cruelty, no pity, only sorrow. She could not understand why. Why would a stranger care? Her heart warned her not to trust, but her soul longed for a voice, any voice, to break her chains of silence. One evening, as she poured wine into a golden cup, she felt a folded paper slip into her hand. Her heart stopped for a moment. She hid it quickly in her sleeve. Later, in the darkness of her room, she opened it with trembling fingers. The paper carried only 4 words. "Do you want freedom?" Her breath caught. Her tears fell. The words burned like fire in her chest. Was it real? Or was it a trap? Was it hope? Or was it another chain? She pressed the paper to her heart. For the first time, silence did not feel safe. It felt like betrayal. To herself. The chains around her were still strong, but something inside her had begun to shake them. Her silence had protected her for years, but now silence felt like a cage she must break. The night was dark, the house was cruel. But a question had been asked, and her soul whispered the answer. Yes. Time became a thief. It stole her laughter, her childhood, her voice. It turned days into dust and years into shadows. Lyra was no longer a child, yet she was not free to be a woman either. She was something in between, trapped, unseen, and unheard. The house around her never changed. Golden lamps still shone, music still echoed, feasts still filled the halls. But Lyra felt like she lived in another world. Her world was silence, pain, and obedience. Her soul had learned to hide deep inside her chest so no one could crush what little remained. Her master aged, but his cruelty did not. He spoke less as years passed, but his silence remained like a heavy stone on her heart. Every command came through a glance, a gesture, a cold smile, and she obeyed, because the price of disobedience was too high. She no longer cried when alone, tears had abandoned her long ago. Instead, she stared at the moon through the window. The moon became her only witness, her only friend. She whispered to it, soft prayers no one would hear. Will this night ever end? Servants came and went. Some stayed long enough to notice her eyes. Others ignored her completely. But one remained, the young servant with quiet sorrow, the one who had once slipped her a paper with 4 words, the words that haunted her heart. Do you want freedom? She never dared to answer, not with her lips, not with her hand, but every glance she gave him was a silent reply. Every breath she took was her yes. He seemed to understand, though they never spoke. Their silence carried more meaning than words. Years passed in this secret connection. A look here, a hidden smile there, a small kindness when no one was watching, like placing food near her when she was hungry, or leaving the door unlocked for just a moment too long. He was no master, no savior, but a reminder that humanity still existed somewhere in the shadows, but with hope came fear. Because rumors filled the house again. Talk of another auction, more children stolen from villages, more innocents sold like coins. Lyra's heart sank whenever she heard these whispers. She saw her younger self in those faceless victims. She felt their cries even before they were captured. And she knew the cycle would never end unless someone broke it. One night, as thunder rolled across the sky, she found herself in the garden. Hidden behind tall stone walls, the rain soaked her hair, her clothes, but she did not care. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel. Her chest rose and fell, her fists clenched, and she whispered into the storm, I will not stay in these shadows forever. The words surprised even her. Her voice was weak, but it was real. It was the first time she had spoken her heart aloud, and though no one heard her, she felt the night listen. The storm carried her vow into the sky, and the moon shone faintly behind the clouds. As if answering her, the next day she noticed something different. The young servant was waiting in the corridor. He walked past her, slipping another folded paper into her sleeve. Her hands shook as she unfolded it later. This time, it had more than 4 words. Soon a chance will come, trust me. Her heart pounded as she read. Her mind raced with questions. Was this real? Or was it another trap? Had someone discovered their silent bond? She pressed the paper against her chest, her breath quickened, fear and hope battling inside her. But a part of her refused to let go. A part of her believed. Days stretched on like an endless rope. She waited for a sign, for something to happen. Every sound in the hall made her heart jump. Every door that opened made her wonder if it was time. The shadows of her years felt heavier but also thinner, as if they were beginning to crack. One evening, she caught the servant's eyes again. This time, his glance was sharper, urgent. He nodded once, almost invisible. Her body froze. Her soul shook. Something was coming, something bigger than the silence. Her years in the shadows had been long, but maybe, just maybe, they were finally about to end. As she lay on the floor that night, she closed her eyes. She thought of the little girl who once stood on an auction stage, the little girl who trembled, who cried, who was sold. That girl was still inside her, but stronger now. Her chains had not broken yet, but her spirit had begun to rise, and with that rise came a single promise. The shadows would not hold her forever. The night was quiet, too quiet. Lyra sat in her locked room, her knees pulled close to her chest. The silence pressed on her ears until even her heartbeat felt loud. She wondered if the servant's note had been only a dream, but her soul refused to believe it. Then came a soft knock, not the heavy sound of guards, not the harsh sound of a master. It was gentle, almost human. Her breath caught, her body stiffened. The door creaked, and a shadow slipped inside. It was him, the young servant, his face pale in the moonlight, his hands trembling slightly. Yet his eyes were steady, filled with fire. For the first time, he spoke to her, not in whispers, not in hidden papers, but in real words. "My name is Kale," he said, his voice low but clear. "You do not know me, but I know you." Lyra stared at him, her lips dry, her heart racing. No one had ever spoken to her like that in years. Her throat burned with the urge to answer, but fear chained her tongue. He knelt beside her, lowering his voice further. "I was brought here like you, but not for the same purpose. I have waited, I have watched, and I know something you must hear." Her eyes widened, confusion mixing with curiosity. For once, silence felt heavier than words. Kale leaned closer, his breath shaking. "This house is not only a prison, it is a market. They trade not just bodies, but secrets, power, and lives," Lyra shivered, the truth striking like lightning. She had always known her suffering was not alone, but hearing it in words made it more real. He continued, "I was placed here to serve, but my real mission is different. I work in shadows, I gather proof, I search for a way to break this chain. And when I saw you, I knew you were more than another victim. You are stronger than you believe." Lyra shook her head, her voice finally breaking free. "No, I am nothing. I am broken. I am already dead inside." Kale's eyes softened, but his voice grew firm. "No, you survived years of silence, years of cruelty, and you are still here. Survival is strength, and strength can be turned into freedom." Her chest tightened. Tears she thought she had lost returned to her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but her fear screamed louder. "What if this is a lie?" she whispered. "What if it is a trap?" Kyle did not flinch. "Then I will die with you, but I will not stop." The words shook her soul. No one had ever spoken of dying for her. No one had ever seen her as worth the risk. Her silence cracked, and for the first time she whispered a question. "Why me?" Kale's reply was simple. "Because I cannot watch you fade into the shadows like so many others. Because even in silence, your eyes have never surrendered. And because I believe one spark can light a fire strong enough to burn this place down." Her heart raced, her mind battled, hope and fear collided inside her chest. For years she had chosen silence because silence meant survival. But now survival felt like a slow death. Now a chance stood in front of her, breathing, human, real. Kale pulled something from his cloak. It was a small key, old and rusty. "This will open the servant's door in the east wing," he whispered. "Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon when the guards are distracted. When the moment comes, you must be ready." The key shone faintly in the moonlight as he placed it in her hand. Her fingers closed around it, trembling. The cold metal burned her palm. Like fire, it felt heavier than chains, but also lighter than air. It was not just a key, it was a choice. Kale's eyes locked with hers. "When the time comes, I will help you," he promised. "But you must trust me, or we will both die." Her lips parted, but no sound came. The storm of her heart was too strong. Still, she nodded just once. And that nod was enough. He slipped back into the shadows. The door closed softly behind him. Lyra sat in the darkness, staring at the key in her hand. Her body trembled, her breath shallow. For the first time in years, silence did not feel like safety. It felt like waiting for the world to change. She lifted the key to the moonlight. Her reflection shimmered in the metal, weak yet unbroken. The years in shadows had shaped her into something she did not yet understand, but Kale's words echoed inside her chest. Survival is strength, and strength can become freedom. That night she did not sleep. She sat with the key pressed to her chest, her heart whispering a truth she had long buried. Maybe she was not broken, maybe she was waiting. And maybe, just maybe, her story was about to begin again. The nights felt longer after the key touched her hand. Every sound in the halls became sharper, every whisper heavier. Lyra could no longer rest in silence. Her heart raced with both fear and hope. The key hid beneath her clothes, its cold weight, reminding her of the choice she carried. Kyle appeared rarely. He passed her in corridors, his eyes speaking louder than words. Each glance told her the same thing. Soon. But soon was a word that felt endless. It made her wonder if freedom was real or only a dream. The house itself seemed to sense her secret. The walls felt closer, the guards' stares colder. Every step she took echoed like thunder in her ears. The laughter of her master's guests grew louder, crueler, and still she waited. One evening, as she poured wine at the table, she noticed Kale's hand brush against the edge of the cup. A tiny scratch appeared on the surface of the glass. To anyone else it meant nothing, but she knew it was a sign. The time was near. That night he slipped another folded note into her sleeve. Her hands trembled as she opened it in the dark. Tomorrow, during the feast, when the guards drink, East Wing door. Her breath caught. The words felt heavier than the walls around her. Tomorrow her life would change, or end, the hours. Before dawn crawled like wounded beasts, Lyra sat awake, clutching the key. Every memory of her suffering played in her mind, the auction, the silence, the years of shadows, and the whisper that never left her heart. Someday, when morning came, her body shook as she moved through the house. She poured drinks, carried trays, bowed her head, but inside her soul was louder than ever. Every glance at Kale burned with hidden fire. Every step toward the East Wing pulled her closer to the edge of fate. The feast began. Golden cups filled with wine, laughter filled the hall. The guards drank greedily, their voices growing thick and heavy. Her master watched with his cold eyes, unaware of the storm rising inside. His walls, Lyra's hands shook as she served, but no one noticed, for who notices a shadow? At last Kale moved. He slipped quietly through the corridor carrying an empty tray. She followed moments later, her feet light, her heart heavy. The East Wing waited, its door hidden from the main hall. She touched the key in her sleeve, her palms damp with sweat. Every step echoed in her mind. She feared the guards would hear her heartbeat before her footsteps, but the hall remained empty, silent except for the feast behind them. Kale turned, his eyes sharp, urging her forward. Her breath caught as they reached the door. Her trembling fingers pulled out the key. The metal scraped against the lock, louder than thunder in her ears. It turned, slowly, painfully. Click. The sound was small, but it felt like an earthquake. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Freedom was only steps away. Her chest rose and fell, her legs weak but moving. Kyle pushed her, gently inside. But before the door could close, a voice cut through the silence. "Where are you going?" Her blood froze. A guard stood in the shadows, his cup of wine still in his hand. His eyes narrowed, his mouth curling into a cruel smile. Kale stepped forward, his body blocking Lyra. "We were told to fetch more wine," he said quickly. But his voice betrayed the truth. The guard laughed, dark and low. "You think I'm drunk enough to believe that?" He threw the cup aside, pulling a blade from his belt. The passage to freedom now felt like a trap. Lyra's knees trembled, her voice broke into a whisper. "It's over." But Kale did not step back. He moved like lightning, slamming the tray. Against the guard's arm, the blade clattered to the floor. The guard roared in anger. The fight was fast, brutal, and desperate. Kale struck again, but the guard's strength was greater. He shoved Kale against the wall, fists like iron. Lyra's eyes darted to the blade on the ground. Her heart pounded, her body screamed to move. Her hands shook as she bent down, fingers closing around the weapon. The metal was heavy, unfamiliar, but it burned with purpose. The guard raised, his fist again, but this time she stepped forward. The blade flashed in the dim light. Her strike was clumsy, weak but enough. The guard staggered back, blood staining his sleeve. His roar echoed through the hall. Cale grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her into the passage. "Run!" he shouted, his voice breaking the silence. They ran, feet pounding against stone. Behind them, voices rose, guards shouting, the alarm spreading. Freedom was no longer a quiet dream. It was a chase, a storm, a fire, and every step forward was both escape and danger. The passage twisted into darkness. Lyra's lungs burned, her legs ached, but she did not stop. Cale's grip kept her steady, kept her alive. The sound of footsteps followed, closer, louder. The question screamed in her mind, was this escape or was this only another trap? The passage was dark and narrow. The air was thick with dust, choking Lyra's lungs as she ran. Her legs screamed in pain, but she pushed forward. Behind her, Cale's hand gripped hers tightly, never letting go. And behind them both came the thunder of boots. The guards were close, their shouts echoing through the stone walls. "Catch them!" one voice roared. Torches lit the blackness behind, shadows stretching like monsters. Every flame was a reminder that freedom was only inches ahead, and death only inches behind. Lyra's heart pounded like a drum. The corridor twisted, opening, into a wide underground chamber. Broken crates and barrels lined the walls. The smell of mold filled the air. Cale pulled her behind a stack of wood, pressing a finger to his lips. She froze, her breath ragged, her chest rising and falling like a storm. The guards entered, their torches casting red light across the chamber. They split into groups, blades ready, eyes searching. Lyra's body trembled as she hid. One wrong sound and it would all end. She clutched the small blade she still carried, her knuckles white. Cale leaned close, whispering into her ear. "There's a gate ahead near the river. If we reach it, we can escape into the forest." His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of truth. The path was narrow, and they would not reach it without a price. The guards moved closer, boots crunching on gravel. A rat scurried across the floor, making Lyra flinch. The sound caught one guard's ear. He turned sharply, raising his torch. Kyle grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her from hiding. "Run!" he shouted, his voice shattering the silence. They dashed through the chamber, feet pounding against the ground. The guards roared behind them, blades flashing. The chase had begun again, louder, fiercer, and freedom was bleeding time. The passage narrowed once more, leading to a wooden gate. Beyond it, Lyra could hear the rush of water. The sound of the river was like a promise, but the gate was locked with heavy chains. Her heart sank, fear clawing at her chest. Cale slammed his shoulder against the gate. The wood shook but did not break. He struck again, his body straining, his voice gritting with pain. The guards were closing in. Their footsteps thundered louder. Lyra stood frozen, fear pressing her like stone. "Lyra!" Cale shouted, turning to her. "Use the blade. Cut the chain." Her hands trembled, but she obeyed. The blade struck the chain, sparks flying. It bent but did not snap. The guards appeared at the end of the passage, torches blazing. Their eyes burned with cruelty. They saw the trapped figures at the gate and laughed. "There's nowhere to run," one sneered. The chain clattered again as Lyra struck, her arms weak with fear. Cale shoved her aside, grabbing the blade from her hand. With a cry, he struck the lock with all his strength. The chain groaned, the wood cracked. At last the gate burst open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the roar of the river. "Go!" Kyle pushed her forward, but Lyra's legs refused to move. "What about you?" she cried, her voice breaking. He looked back at her, eyes sharp but soft. "I will hold them. Run, Lyra." She shook her head, tears spilling. "No, I can't leave you." The guards charged, their torches lighting the night. Cale stepped forward, blade in hand, standing between her and death. "Go," he repeated, his voice firm. "This is the price of freedom." The words pierced her heart like a dagger. She wanted to fight, to stand beside him. But her body betrayed her. Pulling her toward the open gate, her tears blurred the world as she stumbled forward. The roar of the river pulled her into the night. Behind her, the clash of steel filled the air. Kale's voice roared. The guards shouted. The battle raged. Every sound was a knife cutting into her soul. She wanted to turn back, but his last words echoed in her chest. This is the price of freedom. She reached the riverbank. Her breath ragged. The water rushed past, black and endless. She hesitated only a moment before stepping into the cold. The current pulled at her, dragging her away from the house. Her chains, her silence, her years in the shadows. But her heart was heavier than stone. Every stroke forward felt like betrayal. Every breath reminded her that Kale was still behind, fighting, bleeding, risking all for her. Tears mixed with river water as she let the current carry her away. When at last she reached the far bank, she collapsed on the mud. The forest loomed above her, dark and endless. She coughed, shivering, gasping for breath. But she was alive. Alive because someone else had chosen to pay the price. The night was not silent. It carried the echoes of battle, the cries of sacrifice. And though Lyra's body was free, her soul remained chained. Because freedom had not come without loss. And the shadow of that loss would follow her forever. The forest was silent. Not the silence of chains, not the silence of fear, but the deep, endless silence of night. Lyra lay on the wet ground, her body shivering, her breath shallow. She was alive, but her heart felt broken in half. The river still roared behind her. Its waters carried her far from the house of torment, yet the sound of clashing steel still echoed in her mind. Kyle's voice, his final words, repeated like a wound that would not heal. This is the price of freedom. She rose slowly, her legs weak. The forest loomed around her, tall and dark. Every shadow looked like a guard, every rustle like danger. But no one was there. For the first time in years, she was truly alone. She stumbled forward, her bare feet pressed against roots and stones. Her body ached, her hands still carried the memory of the blade. But her eyes lifted to the sky. The moon glowed gently, no longer hidden by walls. She whispered into the air. Kale. His name broke her silence. Tears filled her eyes, spilling freely at last. She cried not like a prisoner, but like a soul reborn. Her steps carried her deeper into the forest, each step heavy with grief, yet lighter with hope. Birds stirred in the branches. Above, the night began to soften, and the horizon held the faintest hint of dawn. When the first light touched her face, she stopped. The warmth of the sun felt strange. It burned her skin, but it also healed her. She closed her eyes, lifting her face to the light. For years, she had known only darkness. Now light wrapped her like an embrace. She fell to her knees, her voice breaking. I am free, she whispered. The words trembled as if they were too fragile to exist. But she spoke them again, louder. I am free. The forest did not answer, but the wind brushed her cheeks as if listening. The leaves whispered back softly, and she felt for the first time that she belonged to the world again. Not as property, not as shadow, but as herself. Her mind returned to the faces of the children she had once seen at the auction. Her heart ached for them. She knew they were still trapped, still suffering. Her freedom was not theirs, and her joy carried guilt, but in that guilt came purpose. Kale's sacrifice had not been only for her. His words carried more than escape. They carried a message. Her life was not hers alone now. It was a flame meant to burn for others. She rose again, wiping her tears. The forest path stretched forward, unknown. Her body was weak, but her spirit was stronger than it had ever been. Every scar she carried, every memory of pain, was now a weapon against the silence. Days passed as she wandered. She found berries, she drank from streams. The forest became her shield and her teacher. She stumbled, she fell, she bled, but she did not stop. One evening, she reached a small village. The people looked at her with wide eyes. Her clothes were torn, her body thin, her face pale, but her eyes glowed with something unbroken. They gave her food, water, and a place to rest. She did not tell them all of her story. Some wounds were too deep for words, but she whispered enough for them to understand that there were others still suffering, that the chains of silence had not yet been shattered. The villagers listened. Some wept, some grew angry, and though fear filled their faces, hope began to stir, for if one broken soul could escape, maybe others could too. If one girl could survive, maybe resistance was not impossible. That night, as she lay beneath a roof not owned by cruelty, she thought of Cale again, his face, his voice, his sacrifice, and she made a vow. His death would not be wasted. The sun rose again, brighter than before. Children laughed in the streets, their voices soft but free. Lyra watched them, her chest heavy with both sorrow and joy. She knew her suffering had ended, but the fight for others had only begun. She touched the scar on her wrist where ropes had once cut her skin. It no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a reminder of who she had been and who she must now become. Not a companion, not a slave, not a shadow, but a survivor. A witness. And perhaps one day a savior for others still trapped. The world ahead was wide and uncertain, but it was hers. As the wind brushed through the trees, she whispered one last time, "This suffering has ended." The forest carried her words into the horizon, and Lyra stepped forward, no longer afraid.